A surgical room, intense lights, monitors beeping steadily. The chief surgeon, known for his arrogance and explosive temper, orders the nurse to leave immediately during a critical procedure. She hesitates for just 3 seconds, enough time to notice something no one else saw. What happened next challenged the entire hospital hierarchy and saved a life everyone considered lost. But the price she paid for her courage was something she never imagined. This is the story of a split-second decision that changed everything and still divides opinions today. My name is Lindsay Harper, and I've been a surgical nurse for 11 years. I grew up in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, where the nearest hospital was 40 minutes away. That distance taught me early on how precious every second can be when someone's life hangs in the balance. I moved to Boston 7 years ago, chasing the opportunity to work at Memorial Hospital, one of the most prestigious medical institutions on the East Coast. The job was everything I'd dreamed of and more. State-of-the-art operating rooms, cutting-edge technology, cases that challenged me every single day. But with prestige came pressure, intense, unrelenting pressure. The surgical department was ruled by Dr. Richard Blackwell, a cardiovascular surgeon with a reputation that preceded him into every room. Brilliant, they said, revolutionary in his techniques, but also ruthless, demanding, and absolutely intolerant of what he considered incompetence. Everyone walked on eggshells around Dr. Blackwell. Residents trembled when assigned to his surgeries. Nurses who'd been there for decades still felt their stomachs tighten when his name appeared on the surgical schedule. I'd worked with him maybe a dozen times before that day, always keeping my head down, following orders precisely, never speaking unless spoken to. That was the unwritten rule. In Dr. Blackwell's operating room, his word was law. Before I continue, I want to know something from you. Where are you watching this story from? It's always incredible to see people from so many different places following these accounts. Write it down in the comments. I really want to know. And that Tuesday started like any other shift in the surgical wing. I arrived at 6 a.m, reviewed the day's schedule, prepared my station. The first surgery was scheduled for 8, a complex cardiac procedure on a 52-year-old man named David Chen, father of 3, small business owner. He'd been experiencing severe chest pains for months before finally seeking help. By the time they got him into imaging, the damage was significant. This surgery was his only chance. I remember standing in the pre-op area, watching his family in the waiting room. His wife clutched a coffee cup with both hands, staring at nothing. His teenage daughter kept checking her phone, probably trying to distract herself from the fear. His 2 sons sat in silence, the weight of possibility crushing them. I'd seen that look countless times, that desperate hope mixed with paralyzing terror. Dr. Blackwell arrived exactly 15 minutes before the scheduled start time, as he always did. He walked past the family without acknowledgement, his focus already on the procedure ahead. In the scrub room, he outlined his approach to the team. Me, 2 other nurses, a resident, and the anesthesiologist. His tone was clipped, precise, leaving no room for questions. The plan was clear. The expectations were absolute. We entered the OR at 7:58. David Chen was already under anesthesia, his chest prepped and draped. The monitors displayed his vitals, heart rate elevated but stable, blood pressure within acceptable range, oxygen saturation good. Everything looked routine. Everything felt routine. But sometimes routine is just the calm before the storm you don't see coming. If this story is gripping you as much as it impacted me, subscribe to the channel now. We're close to reaching 500 subscribers, and your subscription makes all the difference, so more people can discover emotional stories like this one. The surgery began without incident. Dr. Blackwell made his incision with practiced confidence, exposing the damaged area of David's heart. The resident assisted, retracting tissue exactly as instructed. I anticipated every instrument request, maintaining the sterile field, monitoring the surgical count. Everything moved like clockwork. This was what we trained for: precision, synchronization, excellence. But around 40 minutes into the procedure, something caught my attention. A subtle discoloration in the tissue surrounding the primary surgical site. The color wasn't quite right, a slightly darker hue than it should have been. I glanced at the monitors. David's blood pressure had dropped by 8 points in the last 3 minutes. Not dramatic enough to trigger alarms, but noticeable, concerning. I watched for another minute. The pressure continued its slow decline. 9 points now. 10. The oxygen saturation wavered slightly. I looked back at the surgical field. That discoloration seemed more pronounced. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Not yet. Dr. Blackwell, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice neutral. The pressure is trending down. 10 points in 4 minutes. He didn't look up from his work. I can see the monitors, Nurse Harper. Focus on your instruments. I bit my lip. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was normal for this particular procedure. But that tissue color bothered me. I'd assisted in enough cardiac surgeries to know when something looked off. This looked off. Doctor, I think there might be... Did I ask for your opinion? His voice cut through the room like a scalpel. Every person in that OR froze. Unless you've suddenly obtained a medical degree I'm unaware of, keep your observations to yourself. The resident's eyes met mine briefly before darting away. The other nurses stared at their stations. Nobody moved. No, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The monitors continued their steady beeping, but that blood pressure number kept dropping. 12 points now. The tissue discoloration was definitely spreading. I wasn't imagining it. Something was bleeding, slowly, internally, invisibly to everyone else. But I saw it. Dr. Blackwell, I really think, get out. His words were ice. He finally looked up from the surgical field, his eyes meeting mine above his mask. Leave this operating room. Now. The room went silent except for the monitors and the ventilator. Everyone stared at me. The resident looked horrified. The other nurses had gone pale. The anesthesiologist shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. This was unprecedented. I'd never seen anyone dismissed from an active surgery. The humiliation was designed to be absolute. Protocol said I should leave. Hospital hierarchy demanded I leave. My job security required that I leave. Every rational thought in my head screamed at me to apologize, walk out with whatever dignity I could salvage, and let someone more senior handle it. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was seeing problems that didn't exist. Maybe my 11 years of experience counted for nothing compared to Dr. Blackwell's 30, but David Chen's family was in that waiting room. His wife, his daughter, his sons. They were trusting us with his life. And that blood pressure number, 14 points down now, wasn't lying. That tissue discoloration wasn't my imagination. Something was catastrophically wrong, and in another 5 minutes, it might be too late to fix it. I made my decision. My hands stopped trembling. My voice came out steady and clear. No, if this part moved you as much as it moved me, leave your like now. This way, YouTube understands that this story deserves to be seen by more people, and that really helps the channel continue growing. The single word hung in the air like a grenade. Dr. Blackwell's entire body went rigid. The resident actually gasped. Nobody said no to Dr. Richard Blackwell. Nobody. What did you just say to me? His voice was dangerously quiet. I stepped closer to the table, my eyes scanning the surgical field with laser focus. With all due respect, doctor, there's a secondary bleed. Right there. I pointed with my gloved hand to the area I'd been watching. That tissue discoloration indicates internal hemorrhaging. The pressure drop confirms it. 16 points now. You are overstepping every boundary. Look at the tissue, doctor. Please. My voice was firm but not confrontational. I wasn't trying to embarrass him. I was trying to save David Chen's life. The color gradient. The subtle swelling. There's an arterial leak we haven't addressed. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. Nobody moved. Dr. Blackwell's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. His pride was warring with his training, and everyone in that room knew it. If he looked and I was wrong, my career was over. If he didn't look and I was right, David Chen would die. Dr. Blackwell, the anesthesiologist spoke up suddenly, his voice tight. Pressure just dropped another 4 points. 20 total. Heart rate increasing. We're approaching critical. That broke the standoff. Dr. Blackwell looked down at the area I'd indicated. His eyes narrowed. He adjusted his angle, probed gently with his instrument. Then his entire demeanor changed. His shoulders tensed in a way I'd never seen before. Suction. Now. His voice was clipped. Peterson, retract here, carefully. The next 15 minutes were controlled chaos. Dr. Blackwell had found exactly what I'd suspected, a small tear in a secondary artery that had been slowly leaking blood into the surrounding tissue. Small enough to go unnoticed initially, significant enough to kill David Chen if left unaddressed. The bleeding had been masked by the primary surgical site, pooling in spaces we hadn't exposed yet. Clamp, Dr. Blackwell ordered. His hands moved with incredible speed and precision now. Whatever anger he'd felt toward me was completely compartmentalized. This was a surgeon at the peak of his abilities, fighting to save a patient. Suture, 4-O-proline. I anticipated every need, passing instruments before he finished asking, maintaining perfect visibility with suction, monitoring the counts even as my mind raced. The blood pressure had stabilized at its dangerous low, but it wasn't dropping further. That was good. We had a chance. The resident worked with intense concentration, following every instruction exactly. The other nurses moved in perfect synchronization. The anesthesiologist managed David's vitals with steady competence, calling out numbers that gradually began to improve. We were a machine, each part essential, each person contributing to the singular goal of keeping David Chen alive. There, Dr. Blackwell said finally, tying off the last suture. Bleeding controlled. Peterson, check for any other compromised vessels in this quadrant. The resident did as instructed, examining the tissue carefully. Everything looks clean, doctor. Good. Let's finish the primary repair and get him closed up. Dr. Blackwell's voice was steady, professional, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. This had been closer than anyone wanted to admit. The rest of the surgery proceeded without incident. David's blood pressure slowly climbed back toward normal ranges. His heart rhythm stabilized. By the time we were closing, his vitals looked strong. He was going to make it. But the silence in that OR was deafening. Nobody spoke unless absolutely necessary. unnecessary. The unspoken tension pressed down on all of us like a physical weight. Then we finished at 11:32. David Chen was wheeled to recovery, his condition stable and improving. Dr. Blackwell stripped off his gloves and gown without a word and left the OR immediately. The resident followed quickly. The other nurses exchanged glances but said nothing to me. The message was clear. I'd crossed a line, and there would be consequences. I hadn't even made it to the locker room before my pager went off. Report to the surgical director's office immediately. My stomach dropped. I'd known this was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. I changed out of my scrubs with shaking hands, trying to prepare myself mentally for what was about to happen. The walk to the administrative wing felt like walking to an execution. Every colleague I passed seemed to look at me differently. Word travels fast in hospitals. They already knew. The nurse who'd defied Dr. Blackwell. The nurse who'd refused a direct order in the OR. The nurse whose career was probably over before lunch. Dr. Catherine Morrison, the surgical director, was waiting in her office along with 2 HR representatives and the hospital's legal counsel. This wasn't a conversation. This was a tribunal. They asked me to sit. They informed me that Dr. Blackwell had filed a formal complaint for gross insubordination, willful interference in a surgical procedure, and creating a hostile and unsafe environment in the operating room. The words felt surreal. Hostile environment? I'd saved a patient's life. Unsafe? My intervention had prevented a death on the table. But as they read through the charges, I realized how serious this was. Dr. Blackwell wasn't just angry. He wanted me fired, possibly stripped of my nursing license, made an example of. The investigation lasted 6 days. 6 days that felt like 6 months. I was suspended with pay pending the outcome, which meant I sat at home while my entire career hung in the balance. They interviewed every person who'd been in that OR. They pulled the surgical reports, the nursing notes, the anesthesia records. They reviewed hospital protocols and chain of command procedures. I barely slept. When I did sleep, I dreamed of that operating room, of David Chen's family in the waiting room, of Dr. Blackwell's furious eyes above his mask. My partner tried to be supportive, but even they couldn't hide their worry. My mother called every day from Pennsylvania, reminding me that I'd done the right thing, that the truth would come out, but I wasn't so sure. The worst part was the isolation. My colleagues were sympathetic in private. Several texted me words of encouragement, told me they thought I'd been brave, said they hoped I'd be vindicated, but publicly, silence. Nobody wanted to testify on my behalf. Nobody wanted to contradict Dr. Blackwell's version of events. He was too powerful, too connected, too important to the hospital's reputation and revenue. I was just a nurse, replaceable. On the 4th day, they interviewed David Chen. He'd woken up from the anesthesia, been briefed on the surgery's success, and was recovering remarkably well. They asked him if he wanted to be involved in the investigation. He said yes. He wanted to know everything that had happened while he was unconscious on that table. On the 5th day, the hospital's risk management team reviewed the OR security footage. Every surgical suite had cameras for liability purposes, recording everything except audio. They watched the entire procedure, frame by frame, moment by moment, the truth captured in digital clarity. On the 6th day, everything changed. David Chen was discharged from the hospital, healthy and stable, expected to make a full recovery. Before leaving, he requested a meeting with hospital administration. He'd been told the full story by family members who'd been gossiping with other visitors, and he wanted answers. When the hospital tried to downplay the situation, he did something nobody expected. He went to the media. Local news picked up the story first. Nurse saves patient's life, faces termination for defying arrogant surgeon. Then regional news, then national. The narrative was irresistible. The brave nurse standing up to the powerful doctor, risking everything to do what was right. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended. Patient advocacy groups rallied. Within 48 hours, I went from suspended nobody to the face of a national conversation about hospital hierarchies and patient safety. The hospital was forced to accelerate their investigation. They released a statement saying they were conducting a thorough and impartial review of all relevant factors. The security footage was leaked somehow, probably by someone in IT who was tired of the culture of fear. It showed everything. My attempts to communicate concerns, Dr. Blackwell ordering me out, my refusal, the discovery of the hemorrhage exactly where I'd indicated. Everything. The tide turned completely. Dr. Blackwell was placed on immediate administrative leave, pending his own investigation. 3 days later, the hospital cleared me of all charges and offered me my position back with a formal apology. They also offered something else, a promotion to surgical nursing supervisor, a significant raise, and a guarantee that I'd be protected from retaliation. They needed to control the narrative. I was suddenly valuable to them. I accepted the promotion, but I'd be lying if I said everything went back to normal. It didn't. Some surgeons respected what I'd done and sought me out for their procedures, valuing my judgment and instinct. Others saw me as the nurse who'd humiliated one of their own, someone who couldn't be trusted to stay in her lane. The division was clear and uncomfortable. Dr. Blackwell returned after his suspension, but the dynamic had shifted. He was quieter, less explosive, though whether that was genuine growth or strategic self-preservation, I couldn't say. 6 months later, he accepted a position at a hospital in Seattle. We never spoke about that day. Not once. David Chen sends me a card every year on the anniversary of his surgery. He tells me about his kids' accomplishments, about his business, about the life he's living because I refused to leave that operating room. Those cards mean more to me than any award or recognition I've received since, but I think about that moment constantly. Those 3 seconds when I had to choose between obedience and instinct, between protocol and conscience. I train young nurses now, and I tell them this story. I tell them that sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do is trust yourself when everyone else is telling you you're wrong, that your voice matters, that your observations have value, that saving lives is always more important than preserving egos. Would I make the same decision again? Absolutely, every single time. But I'd also tell anyone facing a similar situation that courage comes with a cost. Relationships were damaged. Trust was broken. My career path changed forever. You can't challenge power structures without consequences, even when you're right, especially when you're right. So, what would you have done in my place? Would you have obeyed the order and left that operating room, following protocol and preserving your career? Or would you have risked everything for that instinct, that certainty that something was wrong? The line between courage and insubordination is so thin that sometimes it's impossible to know where you're standing. Write down in the comments, do you think I did the right thing? And if you work in healthcare, have you experienced something similar? I really want to know your opinion on this. If you enjoyed this real and emotional story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next accounts. And don't forget to watch the next recommended video. There's another incredible story waiting for you.